Welcome to Foundation Fridays. This is an offshoot of my Reverse Reset Restore podcast, where we talk about the books that are reshaping our thoughts and our belief systems, teaching and guiding us into a deeper knowing of ourselves. Think of it as the book club for the soul. I'm your host, Sally, and we are kicking off a 2-part episode for Gabor Maté's book, The Myth of Normal. And we start this episode with a question. What if the exhaustion so many of us feel isn't a personal failure, but a cultural one? Welcome to our Foundation Friday episode on the book, The Myth of Normal. I am so excited to talk about this book. And I'm going to be throwing you a few questions during this episode, but there are no expectations for you to answer them, just maybe reflect on them. And we're going to get back to that first question a bit later. Right now, I just want to reassure you about something that I think is a really important reminder. You don't need a dramatic story to be affected or traumatized. Take a moment and let that sink in. I'll say it again. You don't need a dramatic story to be affected or traumatized. Have you ever minimized your distress? Told yourself it could be worse, or I don't have it so bad, or other people know more suffering than I ever will? Yeah, me too. Especially with what is going on in the world and the absolutely despicable things that are coming to the light. That is why today's book matters so much. We're going to explore stress, normalization, and trauma in ways that are broader and perhaps quieter than we're often taught to recognize. I just want to extend an invitation to listen differently to this episode, whether you've read the book or not. You don't need to agree with everything in the book. You don't need to remember every concept. And you don't need to do anything with whatever might arise. This book isn't here to convince you. It's here to accompany you. As we move through this year together, you might notice moments of recognition, small internal nods, where something lands and you think, oh, that makes sense. That's enough. Because understanding when it's kind and spacious is often the first act of healing. I just want to encourage you, if anything stirs as you listen to this episode and the next, maybe a tightening in your chest, there's a heaviness or a sense of recognition, know that that's normal. This material, what we're going to delve into, it isn't light, it isn't easy. It may feel uncomfortable, but it isn't here to overwhelm you. Now, if you've got this book at home or you've picked it up and flipped through the pages while at the library or bookstores, you probably already know it is a beast of a book. It's thick, heavy, condensed. This is the type of book that can naturally make you feel overwhelmed, not only by the content, but also by the sheer volume of its pages. With that in mind, I've chosen to break the myth of normal into 2 episodes. This is the first one, and we're going to explore 2 themes, redefining normal and trauma as a societal issue. And in the second episode, we'll delve into the themes of loss of authenticity, compassion over blame, and hope through awareness. And how we can create ways to be more compassionate to ourselves. Because when we can be compassionate to ourselves, we will naturally and easily be compassionate to others without withdrawing our own self-compassion. There is more than enough to go around. I chose The Myth of Normal as the starting point for this year's Foundation Fridays book club because it doesn't rush us forward. It asks us to pause and look around. And this is uncommon to the way that most of us go about our lives. We are always in a rush. always meeting deadlines, looking for faster and quicker ways to do things, whether it be at home, at work, or at play. We want things to happen with an immediacy that is often actually not even that realistic. And if I can speak only for myself, I know that I have been in a super duper rush for my own healing, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And I've gone into an absolute tailspin at times when the healing is slow or it hasn't even come in the ways or the time frame that I expected. But if we are to consider collective trauma as our normal state of being, or that the ways we use to fill up our time so we can avoid acknowledging just how desperately disconnected we feel, we have to take a much broader look as to how this might show up in our lives. As Gabor states, if trauma entails a disconnection from the self, then it makes sense to say that we are being collectively flooded with influences that both exploit and reinforce trauma. Work pressures, multitasking, social media, news updates, and multiplicities of entertainment sources. These all induce us to become lost in thoughts and frantic activities, gadgets, meaningless conversations. We are caught up in pursuits of all kinds that draw us on not because they are necessary or inspiring or uplifting, or because they enrich or add meaning to our lives, but simply because they obliterate the present. We are also busy rushing around doing, or being in our doing, that we often live outside of the present. This is our normal. This book feels like a beginning, not because it offers answers, but because it changes the questions. Before we talk about healing and growth and boundaries, mindfulness or self-compassion and all things we talk about on the Reverse Reset Restore podcast, we're invited to ask a more fundamental thing. What if the way we're living was never meant to feel this hard? Hands up if you feel like you are caught between a rock and a hard place right now, or maybe you've been there before. How many times have you felt that you've done something wrong to wind up exactly where you are? The guilt and the shame and the fear that comes along with feeling like life is just too damn hard. For the longest time, I felt very much like this was just me, just something I felt alone in my life and my struggles. And even now with my health being at real odds with my willpower, I have felt this creeping hopelessness wash over me at times. What's been encouraging for me personally in reading this book and other books that have similar sort of messages is the idea that I'm actually not alone, and the struggles and the hurt and the pain that I feel and the condemnation and the expectations and the demands that I or others have put on my life are not something unique to me. This is my normal, and it's probably your normal too. And Gabor Maté doesn't frame suffering as a personal flaw or a lack of resilience in this book. Instead, he gently but firmly widens the lens. He asks us to consider that many of the things that we struggle with, exhaustion, anxiety, disconnection, illness, numbness, frustration, rage, may be understandable responses to a world that asks us to adapt at great personal cost. That's why this book belongs at the start of the year, not as a resolution, but as a reorientation. So often the start of a year comes with pressure to fix, improve, optimize, or become someone better. I talk about this a little bit in my recent episodes around creating a word for the year rather than holding a New Year's resolution. So for me, the myth of normal quietly refuses that agenda. Instead, it lays a foundation built on understanding rather than effort. It helps us see that what we call normal is often deeply dysregulating. What we call coping is often survival. And what we call broken is often a nervous system just trying to do its best. And this matters because within this context, so much personal development work can subtly turn into self-blame. We try to meditate better, rest better, communicate better, without first questioning the conditions we're living inside. For me, this book says pause first, understand first, be gentle first. And these are things that the world doesn't want us to do, or at least doesn't want to teach us to do. And what makes the myth of normal such a powerful starting point is that its themes echo quietly through every book that's going to follow in the series of books that I've chosen for 2026. And as we move through the year, you may begin to notice there are some reoccurring ideas within the books, even though they are vastly different in many ways. There's the importance of self-awareness before self-change, the role of compassion rather than discipline, the understanding that healing is relational, embodied, and, slow. And the idea that wholeness comes from reconnection, not perfection. Some of the other books we'll read this year may focus more specifically on acceptance or presence, boundaries, self-trust, or emotional regulation. But the myth of normal provides the soil those ideas grow in. It gives language to experiences many people already feel but haven't been able to name. Why rest feels unsafe. Why slowing down feels uncomfortable. Why being fine doesn't feel like being okay. Why nothing bad happened is often a misunderstanding of trauma. Why trauma can be found in absence, not just presence. Why you don't need a dramatic story to be affected or traumatized. And this is one I identify with a lot, because even though I have lived with some pretty terrible things that happened to me as a child and a young person and a young woman, I would overall consider my childhood and my life a great one. As a child, I had loving parents, a strong extended family network that made me feel safe and secure. I had friends and adventures and opportunities. I had God. But as I delve into this idea that we have geared our society to live in this constant cycle of low-grade trauma, I have realized that the wounds I carry, no matter how big or small they may seem, have created the sort of stockpile of stress that has impacted my life in multiple ways. And all these seemingly little insignificant things have contributed to our collective trauma as a society. Right now, I want to start here with the word normal. We use it so casually. This is normal. Everyone feels like this. That's just how things are now. And yet, so many people are exhausted, overstimulated, anxious, disconnected from their bodies, running on adrenaline and calling it productivity. And somewhere along the way, that state became the baseline. Not thriving, not feeling well, just functioning. Gabor and Daniel Maté offer a simple but quietly radical idea in this book. Normal is not the same as healthy. And once you hear that, it's hard to unhear. If this normal we live in is surviving rather than thriving, is about just getting through the day only to get up and grind through the next one, always in this perpetual state of trying to fit the status quo, then my question is, what if the exhaustion so many of us feel isn't a personal failure, but a cultural one? For many of us, stress isn't something that comes and goes. It is the background hum of daily life. I want you to just be present with your body right now in this moment. Notice what it's doing. Do you have tight shoulders? Are your thoughts racing? Are you always feeling slightly behind, always slightly bracing? We talk about being busy the way we talk about the weather, as if it's neutral, as if it's unavoidable. But when stress is constant, the nervous system never really gets to stand down. It stays alert. It's always scanning. It's always preparing. It's always waiting for that tiger to come get us, right? And our body adapts. And that adaptation can look like anxiety that never quite switches off, exhaustion that sleep just doesn't fix, irritability we feel ashamed of, and numbness that we mistake for being calm. And this is where Maté's framing matters. Much of what we call normal is a response to chronic stress. It's not a personality flaw. It is not a lack of resilience. It's not because you're not good enough or perfect enough. It is a response, a stress response. One of the most seductive myths of modern life is the idea that if you're still showing up, still working, parenting, caregiving, producing, then you must be okay. But functioning, it's a very low bar. You can function while dissociated from your body and disconnected from joy. You can function when you're suppressing emotions or running on obligations instead of desire. Many people don't ask, how am I? They ask, can I still get through the day? And when the answer is yes, we keep going. We don't pause to question the cost. And believe me, there is a cost we are paying. Questioning would mean slowing down. And slowing down in this culture can feel unsafe. It can make us feel less than normal. And we've been trained that trying to fit in is the normal thing to do, no matter the personal cost. But coping, and this is where the language gets slippery. We say, I'm coping, I'm managing, I'm holding it together, or my personal favorite, I'm still alive. But coping kind of is another word for enduring. It means pushing through. It means overriding our signals. It means telling the body to wait. And sometimes coping is exactly what's needed, especially when we're in seasons of real pressure or grief. But when coping becomes the long-term strategy, our normal, well, the body keeps the score. Put your hand up if your body's scoreboard of pain, disease, and illness seems to be kicking your butt, because it is definitely the season I feel like I'm in at the moment, time and time again. This idea of coping, of pushing through, of placating society to remain a part of it in a way, really is an abuse of ourselves. Maté in this book isn't asking us to stop coping overnight, because coping is a necessary mechanism at times. What he is asking us to do is to notice when our coping has replaced care, or when we are enduring out of obligation or necessity or pure sheer stubbornness. There are so many things about my life I know that I have adopted as truth. These are things that we have all quietly normalized. Maybe these are examples that you can identify with too. So feeling guilty for resting. I've been sick for pretty much the whole year so far. It sucks. And I am struggling. I have moments where I break down because I feel guilty that I can't be at work. I feel guilty that I'm not producing. I feel guilty that I can't really unpack from our shift and move into my house the way that I want to. I feel guilty that I can't really do anything for more than 10 minutes before I just crash and burn and I need to sleep because I have a fever. So that's a normal behavior that I have. I think another normalization that we've done, we check our phones before we check in with ourselves. How many of you wake up in the morning and reach for your phone first thing, or you take it to the bathroom with you, or before you've even got your coffee or your juice or your cereal or whatever it is you do first thing in the morning? That is the first thing. You wake up and you check online. Another normalization technique I think we've all fallen into the trap of is that we measure our worth by our output, or we ignore the early signs of burnout until they become impossible to ignore. And for me, this shows up as illness. None of these normalization things, none of these coping strategies, none of this is because we're weak. It's because we adapted to what was required of us. As the Matés state, trauma is in most cases multi-generational. The chain of transmission goes from parent to child, stretching from the past into the future. We pass on to our offspring what we haven't resolved in ourselves. The home becomes a place where we unwittingly recreate, as I did, scenarios reminiscent of those that wounded us when we were small. That's Gabor. If we were to agree with this idea, then we begin to realize that our adaptation begins before we even arrive here. Trauma, presented as a family norm, is what we are born into, grow with, and pass on and adapt to. And while adaptation is intelligent, it isn't the same as health. It's a survival mechanism. What we accept, what we don't know anything different from, what we do as a belief system becomes the norm. And the trauma, the wound, takes up all the space of who we could be. I want to offer another gentle question. What feels normal in your life right now, but doesn't feel kind? I ask this question not to judge it and not to fix it, just to notice. Maybe it's the pace that you set, the way you speak to yourself, the company you keep, the lack of rest, the constant background tension, the food choices you make, the addiction to the doom scroll. You don't need an answer today. Awareness is enough. As we keep going in this episode, we're going to widen the lens even further, away from individual habits and towards the systems and relationships that shape us. Because once we stop blaming ourselves for not thriving in conditions that were never nourishing, something shifts. And that shift is where I think understanding begins. So if what we call normal is often a response to stress, the next question becomes, what are we actually responding to? When many people hear the word trauma, they think of something extreme, a single event, an accident, a catastrophe. And if that's the definition we're working with, it's easy to think, well, that doesn't apply to me, or nothing terrible happened. I wasn't abused, I wasn't neglected, I survived. But the myth of normal invites us to soften that definition, while freeing it from the constraints of this very narrow idea of what defines trauma. One of the most quoted lines from Maté's work is this: trauma is not what happens to you, but what happens inside you. Trauma isn't just the event, it's the impact. It's what the nervous system learned. It's what the body had to do to keep going. It's what never quite got processed, held, or metabolized. And two people can live through the same experience, and one feels supported and seen and accompanied, while the other feels alone. And it's not the event that determines the trauma. It's the absence of safety. This is where the conversation often shifts for people. Because trauma isn't only about what did happen, it's also about what didn't. Not being comforted, not being believed, not being attuned to, not having the space to express emotion. Gabor puts it this way: we are shaped as much by what didn't happen as by what did. Many listeners may recognize themselves here, not in the stories of chaos, but in stories of quiet adaptation, being easy, being low maintenance, learning not to need too much, becoming self-reliant, never asking for help because you feel like you won't get it anyway, and just getting on with it. We are, as human beings, wired for connection. Our nervous systems develop in relationship. So when stress, fear, or other emotions that don't feel very good show up, and there is no one to help us hold it or express it, our body learns to hold it alone. And this is not a failure of our amazing, incredibly complex bodies, by the way. It's intelligence. It's in our design. Children especially will always choose attachment over authenticity. If expressing themselves threatens connection, they adapt instead. They become agreeable, self-sufficient, emotionally contained. And those adaptations often look like strengths until the body starts asking for something else. This is where the personal meets the political. Gently, without blame, we live in systems that reward productivity over presence, or value independence over interdependence. Treat rest as something that needs to be earned, or believes that resilience compensates for relationships, and that hardening up is stronger than vulnerability. So many people are carrying stress that didn't originate inside them, but they're the ones left to manage it. This is why Gabor insists trauma is not just an individual issue. It's relational, it's cultural, it's systemic. And when disconnection becomes widespread, it starts to look normal. At the heart of this book is this simple but profound idea. Disconnection is the deepest wound. Disconnection from the body, emotions, needs, authenticity, each other. And the body, always so loyal to us, adapts to survive that disconnection. And sometimes it'll come through as anxiety or numbness, sometimes through illness, not as a punishment, never as a punishment. Our bodies don't punish us. They try to communicate with us. And this is what it is. It's not punishment, it's communication. But we've been taught to not communicate with our bodies. Now, if you're listening and thinking, but I had a good childhood, my parents did their best, others had it worse, all of that can be true, and this can still matter. As Gabor states, it doesn't matter whether we can point to other people who seem more traumatized than we are, for there is no comparing suffering. Nor is it appropriate to use our own trauma as a way of placing ourselves above others. You haven't suffered like I have, or as a cudgel to beat back others' legitimate grievances when we behave destructively. We each carry our wounds in our own way. There is neither sense nor value in gauging them against those of others. Trauma isn't a competition. And acknowledging impact doesn't require blaming anyone. Understanding isn't an accusation, it's an opening. This is where the myth of normal asks us to widen the lens beyond the body, beyond the individual. Gabor reminds us that what we experience in our bodies and our minds doesn't exist in isolation. Health and illness are not random states in a particular body or body part. They are, in fact, an expression of an entire life lived, one that cannot be understood in isolation. It is influenced, or better yet, arises from a web of circumstances, relationships, events, and experiences. I find that idea so compelling, so encouraging, because nothing about us exists in isolation, not our struggles and not our healing. I want to offer another gentle question. What did you learn to carry on your own before you were really ready to? Again, no need to answer out loud or no need to go digging. Just notice if anything surfaces or what doesn't. That's enough. As we come to the end of this episode, I just want to slow us down a little. We've talked about things that can feel really big, about stress, about trauma, about the ways we adapt to the world around us so that we normalize that trauma, the wounds of our families, our cultures, ourselves. And I want to reiterate what I said right at the beginning of this episode. If anything feels uncomfortable or close to home, that makes sense. But I want to be really clear about something here. Nothing we've explored today means there's something wrong with you. There is nothing wrong with you. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. What I think this book offers is context. And context changes everything. So many of us have been taught to internalize difficulty, to assume that if we're tired or anxious or overwhelmed or disconnected, the problem must be ours. It must be us. It must be me. This book and this conversation gently push back on that idea. The book suggests that many of the struggles we carry are reasonable responses to unreasonable conditions. And when we understand that, shame begins to loosen its grip. You don't need to do anything with this. There's no homework here, there's no action plan, there's no expectation that you'll take what you've heard and turn it into change. All I want to encourage you to do is notice. Oh, that resonates. Oh, I feel a bit uncomfortable hearing that. Anything like that comes up, that's enough. Awareness doesn't demand urgency. And that's what we tend to do though, right? In our desperation for change, we strive, we demand, and we continue to hurt ourselves in the process. Gabor quotes James Baldwin in the book, and he says this: "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." Awareness is facing these things in our lives and not trying to brute force or impose our will on changing it, but recognizing it. Awareness doesn't demand change. It simply asks for kindness. How will you show up for yourself with more kindness today? That's a question I have started to ask myself every morning before I get out of bed, before I reach for my phone, before I say good morning to my partner, before I do anything. One of those first things in the morning. How will you, Sally, show up for yourself with more kindness today? In the next episode, we'll turn inward and we'll explore what it costs us to adapt, to live in a state of normal, which truly is a myth, and how the way back begins not with fixing, but with compassion. If this episode brought up anything tender, please, I encourage you, take care of yourself, whether that's drinking some water, stepping outside, reaching out to someone who's safe for you. Healing doesn't happen through endurance, it happens through connection. If this episode resonated, you don't need to do anything with it right away, but If you'd like to stay with these ideas a little longer, you're welcome to join me on our socials and let me know what spoke to you most in this episode or in this book, The Myth of Normal. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, someone who's been quietly coping, enduring, you might consider sharing this episode with them, and I'd be grateful if you did that. However you move on from here, thank you so much for listening and being a part of this. I'll meet you in the next episode, which is part 2 of our discussion on the myth of normal, which I've titled Coming Home to Ourselves. I'll leave you with one final quote from the book, one that I often return to and reflect upon when I become aware of my actions, or more to the point, reactions to something I might be experiencing. It inspires me to consider all those moments when I'm operating out of my own myth of normal, my pain, my perfectionism, my sudden rush to anger, or my pulling away from those around me. The meaning of the word trauma in its Greek origin is wound. Whether we realize it or not, it is our woundedness, or how we cope with it, that dictates much of our behaviour, shapes our social habits, and informs our ways of thinking about the world.